New video, new live. I'm gonna be talking about um under ideal conditions, what's next? What are the right steps, or what are what I think are kind of the next steps for nation building and for economic growth. Um, I think I've talked enough about you know, so previously I've talked about these things, right? Reducing the size of government, right? I've talked about NRB and their emphasis. And I think it just kind of goes without much emphasis. Good governance. So reduction slash the end of corruption. Um, and good governance. So these things kind of go without saying, I think. Okay, but so I'm kind of going to talk about these things here. So if everything goes right under ideal conditions, what's the next steps? What are the next steps? Um, how to build the path for Nepal's growth. That's kind of the I think that's kind of important for us to talk about, kind of emphasize. Oh, just see if I'm live. It's working. Okay, great. I happen to be live. Yeah, and thank you for anybody that's watching. Thanks. It seems I'm getting like, like 50, 60 views on these live streams, which is awesome. Very thankful. This isn't everybody's content, so even if it's just like 20 people watching, that's great. And even if you're only watching for a few couple minutes, I appreciate that. I'm hoping my parents keep watching it. You know what I mean? That's the big thing. I don't know. I gotta call my mom and be like, "Yo, you gotta catch my live." My dad was watching it, so I'm hoping he's watching it. Um, okay, but yeah. So today's topic is if everything goes right under ideal conditions, what are the next steps? It's the screen is a bit. It looks a bit overexposed to me, so I hope people can see it well enough. Okay. So the first thing I have is import substitution. This is kind of the playbook for developing countries, right? This is how South Korea did it. Um, it's a different story for like Japan. It's a bit different for China, but kind of looking at South Korea. South Korea is similar. I think it's a small enough nation, which was relatively in a similar economic condition in the 60s and 70s, right before it started to kind of explode in terms of growth, kind of grow rapidly. So this is kind of that playbook. I think that's a good playbook. I don't think it's necessary to really try to reinvent the wheel. So I think this is a good. Obviously, it differs in the specific in the specifics, right? In terms of, well, okay, we're talking about import substitution. Well, how is that going to be possible, right? You have to consider the geopolitical consequence, the conditions, obviously the geographic conditions, right? The fundamentals, right, of either country, but just kind of in size and where it is. Obviously, South Korea's got oceans. It's a peninsula, so it's got oceans on all three sides. Nepal doesn't have the luxury for that, so you kind of have to consider that. So I kind of thinking about that. I'm going to try to make some arguments in this live stream. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to look at was Nepal's imports. So I have import substitution is number one. Substitution is absolutely key um, to manage the balance sheet of the country. So kind of have a growing, or if not stable, or if the foreign reserves have to decrease a very slow rate. And the way you manage that is you have more dollars coming in and going out. And I've already talked about kind of the difficult position that the NRB is in, and the problems with capital control. And so considering all that, right, you kind of have to say, okay, well, even if you reduce capital controls and allow for capital to flow freely, or as freer than now, right? You still want the balance sheet to be maintained, right? You don't want dollars to flow out. You don't want foreign reserves to run empty. Nepal's still I mean, still, it will be a very import focused country for a long time, and even then, I don't think it's going to be truly, you know, self Atmanirbhar, right? So independent and kind of self dependent or self sustaining. Um, But kind of looking at the categories slash products that Nepal imports, again, OEC World, um, they have a very nice visual. So I've kind of put the numbers now. I just copied it from here in a more in a linear fashion. So 2023 total imports were 10.3 billion. It's slightly increased, obvious, of course, but yeah, big categories: mineral products, machines, metals, vegetable products, right? So when we're talking about an agricultural revolution, it's important to know and understand that that I I hope I'm recording this. Okay, I am recording it with my AirPod. Oh, this is better audio quality. So when we talk about having an agricultural revolution, the agricultural revolution is really only going to account for 10%. I mean, yeah, agriculture is only 10% of the imports, right? Nepal only imports 10% of the ag goods. And the exports, it's kind of it's the second largest, but it's not that great. It's like, okay, well, vegetable products and also foodstuffs, right? I want to say like 270. It's probably like wood products, 325 ish, right? Animal products, not that much. So it's a small category. It's a very small category. Oh, I don't want to do that. It is a it is a very small category. Um, it's only I have 0.93. Um, but you have these smaller categories like foodstuffs, which is what again really it's really just around 10 billion. Or sorry, it's kind of around 1 billion that we're looking at. All right, in terms of we're looking at imports now, around 1 billion, around maybe 1.5, around 2, right, at best. And it's not possible to substitute the importation through domestic production, right? Like rice. So the fundamental problem with rice is irrigation. Nepal with ideal irrigation, right? I mean, in parts of India with proper irrigation, you can get 4 harvests of grain, right? In the Gangetic Plain, um, and that's why that's why UP Bihar has such a large population, such high population density. It's kind of been the cradle of civilization in South Asia, is because of this phenomenal naturally occurring irrigation, fertile floodplains, right? Excellent climate for 3 to 4 harvests. So it's possible for grains and legumes and corn even to for agricultural productivity to increase. Right. This is really a fact. This is really a function of agricultural productivity. So because land is limited, right? Especially like land is suitable for grain production, which is really just the plains, flatland. They do grow corn, but it's labor intensive in the hills. So really, this is a function of agricultural productivity. So like tons per acre. How many tons per acre of rice are we growing? And it's around 3 tons per hectare right now, right? It's like Japan, I think as high as like 6 to 7 tons, right? And so you can kind of double this number theoretically, right? So the fundamentals allow for, maybe like a doubling, maybe not a doubling, but 1.5x increase in agricultural productivity. And so really, rice, corn, legumes, these are a function of fertilizer availability and fertilizer availability, right? Having a functioning market that supports farmers, that allows them to profit and to make investments in their business, right? So that's kind of, so again, I'm assuming ideal conditions, right? So in 6 months we have, in 5 months now, we have elections, right? A solid government is formed. They work on good governance. They work on reducing corruption, and slowly in the next 5 years, kind of corruption starts to go down. Right, the incident rate of corruption goes down, and the magnitude of corruption of each individual case goes down. Right, good governance is observed and practiced. Right, and kind of investor confidence is built through those means, and kind of talking about the previous policies. Right, reduction in government and managing kind of capital controls, reducing capital controls, which would incentivize foreign investment, um, and it would also reduce the cost of individual parcels, right? Kind of lead to an increase in uh, land area, makes it cheaper and more profitable to operate these businesses in agriculture, right? And so really, but at the end of end of the day, right? 200 million in others, right? So when we're looking at vegetable products, everything that's not on here, so all the bananas and other fruits and spices and ground, all these things, right? That's others, 200 million. Uh, it's yeah, 200 million, right? 21 million soybeans, spices. So it's possible to increase yields to some respect, right? And ideal case, maybe I can see this 200 900 million number, right? If things were static and you weren't accounting for like inflation and stuff, maybe that decreasing, right? Or let's talk about like percentages, right? Maybe like 20 to 30% import uh, percent of the imports being substituted by domestic production. So, you would have to see an increase in rice production and yields, which is a function of irrigation, right? And you can kind of imagine a world where, well, if you have good governance and no corruption, right, then the government can kind of easily invest in these, irrigation projects. I mean, there are so many irrigation projects that are kind of proposed, like like all these diversion projects that divert water from the Himalayan rivers to agricultural land, right? Maybe even creating, dams in the Tsure, right? That retains some of the water that would have flowed out from to to the Brahmaputra and the Padma River through Bangladesh, right, into the Indian Ocean, right. Instead of letting that water go into the Indian Ocean, maybe negotiating with India and Bangladesh to kind of say we're going to retain some of this water for agricultural use, right? And creating a dam, right? Really, I mean, it's just a matter of, just digging, right? It's not a very complicated engineering challenge. And Nepal's been, has gotten it better at building dams and building um, these pipes and underground diversions. So and canals, right? So you can kind of imagine a scenario where this happens, where vegetable products, right, especially grain, and even like stuff like onions and potatoes and soybean and fruits and stuff like that, uh, kind of utilizing the hills. If a farmer is allowed to, it can cheaply purchase land and have a decent enough land area to farm in, right? You can imagine a case where they can make their fruit business profitable, or profitable enough that they can compete with Indian imports, right? And so that's kind of the first goal. And after that, really, it's like I think really import substitution, it's in agriculture is going to be 20 to 30%, so it's not that much. So we're looking at 300 million in current dollars. In term that's 1% of total GDP. But again, now you're also but you also have to look at future growth, right? Well, future consumption is going to be fueled by domestic production, right? And so you know malnutrition, right? How do you tackle that? How do you tackle the fact that uh, Nepalis don't get enough calories as much nutritious food, right? Not a very enough diet. Well, you can kind of have domestic production manage that, and I think and best case maybe half of the vegetable or agriculture imports gets managed by domestic gets matched by domestic production, right? And so I'm kind of looking at vegetable products. That's what I think an agricultural revolution is important. It also drives the second point here, growth in exports, right? I'll talk about that in a bit. But sticking with import substitution, um, okay, big category is mineral products, right? And they put petroleum gas, all these petroleum products, right? Energy, essentially. So this is the category. Um, Coal briquettes, again, this is for industrial use. LPG for cooking, and some industrial use, right? Refined petroleum for industry and for transportation. And so, and this has already started to happen, right? In terms of substituting the importation of petroleum and petroleum-based products for domestic energy, right? Again, this is a function of good governance and ending corruption, right? And having kind of a robust hydropower sector. So how do you now this is where hydropower comes into play. Obviously, this is a big thing for me. Kind of the main reason I went to Nepal to build a electric vehicle company to utilize Nepali hydropower to kind of um, expedite the revolution, right? That's kind of Daruga's thesis, Daruga technology. Um, so this is a function of hydropower. Largely, it's a function of hydropower. You will not have a sufficient enough reduction in petroleum imports. It's not because well, it's a function of hydropower, but it's also a function of how many ICE vehicles you have in the country, right? And that takes a long time. These things have a slow replacement rate. So ICE vehicles will stay in the streets for a long time. So I think reducing imports on ICE might help, but that's I can't say for sure right now. You kind of I think having a domestic manufacturer of small electric vehicles like Daruka is absolutely key for this. Um, and for LPG, right? Um, Domestic manufacturing with for like induction ovens, induction stoves, and resistive stoves, stuff like that. Right, that's key. So, but again, if you have domestic production of that, that's you're looking at import substitution, right? In kind of two categories. Now you don't have to import stoves, right? Which is great. Um, I think machines are the category that are the least likely to that are the least subject to import substitution. Like computers, Nepali made computers. Nepal's tech sector is not at the level where it can um, build its own computers or telephones. Right, cell phones is a big category, and so this is stuff that I think I foresee actually growing and not decreasing. And as income grows, people's demand for these goods increases. So actually, I think this is one of those categories where you actually see it closely correlates with income and GDP per capita. But things like transformers and insulated wires and stuff like that, right? These are so transformers, insulated wire, some of these basic things, refrigerators, right? These are possible for domestic industries to tackle, right? You just kind of have to import the raw materials. And I think kind of um, subsidizing or perhaps promoting or giving tax subsidies and tax breaks to these to manufacturers and industries corporations that try to tackle this is a good step, kind of starting small with the tax breaks and then kind of seeing where that goes is it would be my suggestion, right? But there are a lot of things that you know but here's the thing, like if Nepalis, start making, let's say they focus on one category, which is, let's say, like I just refrigerators, right? And there's a Nepali refrigerator brand. Well, Nepal is a big market to the south of it, right? Like kind of focusing on one product category and saying, okay, well, Nepal makes some really good refrigerators, right? Well, it can compete with Indian manufacturers. Okay, it can compete with Indian manufacturers, and it can kind of uh, latch onto India's growth. India's facing or it's going through tremendous levels of growth, right? We're not sure if it's going to see China levels of growth in the next 20, 30 years, but it's doing well for itself, and so kind of saying, but that's why you have to kind of be reluctant in um, you have to be very careful about how you subsidize these companies, right? You can't have you can't have a company make a product just for the domestic market, right? It's not going to be profitable. It's not going to achieve the scale. And so, but if you start subsidizing it, the incentives get fucked up, and it doesn't promote efficient efficiency in the production. Um, so that's why subsidies you have to, I think, starting small, allowing for it to capture or try to do well in the domestic market is key, and then kind of see, but these things take like 10, 15 years, right? Metals, I think for metals it's very hard. Metals is one of those categories where domestic energy, you can import raw raw iron, right? As raw as possible. Again, but the thing about importing raw iron is that's subject to transportation costs, right? And without proper transportation infrastructure, you have to kind of account for the transportation costs in your cost function. So, but you can kind of in the marginal cost, right? But also Nepal has access to cheap energy, which reduces marginal costs, and so I think there's a potential for balancing there. There's like an equilibrium that we kind of have to explore. I need to see the data. I kind of have to like build some models to say exactly what the case is, but I think there is a place for equilibrium there. Okay, and yeah, I mean the other categories are kind of small, like packaged medicaments. Some of these things do get made in house, but again, it's not possible. So like like beauty products or cleaning products and scented mixtures and things like these, right? It's not possible for Nepal to be like, we're gonna have domestic industries for all of these, right? Really, the play is you kind of let the free market decide, and you hope that Nepal's good at like two or three of these categories, three of these products, right? So good that it can compete in the international market, right? So, if it can kind of if the Nepali economy can kind of come up with like a beauty brand, right? That manufactures beauty products in house, right? It's not going to capture all 37 million of this market, but it might actually the brand might be worth a lot more than this, right? Might have revenues more than this, right? Yearly revenues of like 100 million, just based on the fact that the product's so good that it's doing well in foreign markets, right? And so that's kind of how you want to do it. That's why I think it's not the right play, it's not the right approach from a policymaking standpoint to subsidize these industries for the sake of import substitution wholly. It's a very nuanced argument. You have to kind of do a case. You have to analyze it case by case. Textiles, again, I think textiles are one of those things where it's a high labor, it's a labor intensive business, and so just to give so many people jobs, I think subsidizing this is fine. I think textiles is, you know, it seems to me like textiles are, kind of low margin, high production, high volume, right? And so you don't necessarily need, and it's so high volume that a few textile companies um, can lead to import subsidies. So I would say in my list, right, um, the largest magnitude will come from mineral products just by reducing petroleum imports, LPG and coal imports, right? The next will be from vegetable products, and then textiles, right? So we can, I mean, like 500 million from mineral products, right? 300 million from vegetable products, right? Textiles, I'm just gonna say 200 million, right? And so now we're already looking at savings of around $1 billion, which is 10%, and then maybe just like another couple hundred million, right? And so if we're looking at like 10, 15, 20% import substitution, in the next 5 to 10 years, that's a very good good place to be in, right? That's a very good place to be in. It also leads to capital formation, and that's kind of another benefit, right? The firms that are leading the charge in import substitution um, are investing in the country, and so that's providing jobs, and it's kind of building a solid foundation for the economy. And so that's a good place to be in, right? So I think kind of thinking about, in the next 5 years, you were looking at like 7%, in the next 10 years, 15% import substitution, right? So that's a good, because naturally imports are going to increase with GDP, right? So I think in the next 10 years, if Nepal can manage, if this number, this 10.3 billion number, right? If it's like, oh shit, if it's like 11, 12 right now, if it stays at that level, so it doesn't increase, but it also doesn't decrease, right? But GDP is growing, then import share, of GDP is decreasing, right? And so I think that's the magnitude of this number doesn't have to change, right? The absolute value of this number, 10.3 or 10, 11 or 12, doesn't have to change. It's just the share, right, of total GDP. So yeah, that's kind of import substitution. And then that kind of also touches on growth in exports, right? A big export sector is electricity. This is being discussed. I think it's the wrong play to prioritize energy exports. The better play is to highly highly incentivize domestic consumption for industry and for for um, for households, right? And then only consider signing these long-term contracts. The only thing about energy exports is that these are subject to long-term energy contracts, export contracts, 5 to 10 years, where Nepal has to be like, okay, to Bangladesh or to India, it has to be like, okay, we're gonna sign this where we're gonna say we're gonna deliver certain gigawatt hours of energy per year. And while that's great when you have like on the spot surplus, but you don't want the economy to be bogged down by that, right? You don't want it to be like, oh, there's domestic demand, but we're locked into these contracts that forbid us that we have to that we can't renege on, and so we have to sell the energy, right? Even though there's domestic demand, and usually the prices that NEA gets is a lot less than if they were selling it to households. So yeah, but growth in exports, I think kind of specializing in a few vegetable products, but again, you can't do that from like a planned perspective, right? The government can't be like, okay, we're going to focus on oranges, right? It's really you have to let the free market figure it out. To let the free market figure it out, it takes 5 to 10 years, but it's going to be much more robust than if there's strong government intervention. Um, so yeah, I mean that's kind of the thing about growth in exports, and that kind of leads to capital formation in key areas, right? The key areas are hydropower, right? Um, and then like I said, a few sectors where you need industry. So in metallurgy, in the production of iron and steel, right? and maybe like refrigerators or air conditioners and stuff like that. And you like small electric trucks like Vatican's doing. For farming equipment, stuff like that. Um, if there's capital formation and investment and kind of the building of strong institutions in the economy, right? Not legal institutions, but economic institutions, right? Um, these things kind of just happen, right? But again, like I said, it be you know immediate step is import substitution, but it's how do we make policies? And again, this is assuming that there's no corruption and that we have the right minds, in government that are thinking about these problems, right? And there's enough, human capital to kind of instantiate um, these changes. That you kind of bring in the industrial revolution, right? If you have, if your exports are growing, right? There's a growth in energy, and you have the surplus of energy, which aren't subject to, export contracts. Um, right? The big thing about cheap hydropower is like that Nepal has access to is marginal costs are none. It's just you amortize the cost of building the dam over 20, 30 years or whatever your loan period is, right? So really your marginal cost is only, and then like scheduled maintenance, right? So every year you got to check on the turbines and stuff like that. Some guy, some engineer has to stay there, checking the um the distribution lines and the transmission lines and stuff like that, right? Other than that, I mean, this is a very low marginal cost way of producing energy, whereas burning oil or coal, right, is a higher marginal cost. And so the way I see it is, if we achieve this ideal condition, it doesn't have to be like fully ideal, right? It could just be a lot better than what it is now, the governance situation, right, and the corruption situation, that we kind of invite the industrial revolution in 10, 15 years. It just kind of happens, right? And it starts out, like very slowly, right? It's a logistic graph, right? And you kind of see the highest levels of growth in the next 10, 15 years. Okay. So under ideal conditions, you cannot stop an industrial revolution. Okay. You cannot. This is a foregone conclusion, right? If you just let the economy exist, the industrial revolution, the way I've kind of explained it here, is going to happen. Okay, if just by virtue of the way the free market works and the way that people are greedy and they want to earn more and they want to produce and um, and they want to consume and stuff like that, right? And people are profit seeking, firms are profit seeking, households want to continually consume. Okay, and so once Nepal reaches this like kind of experiences or undergoes this industrial revolution, I think it's like a 10, 15 year, thing. So, in 10 years, I think we'll see it. It'll last for 10 years. The high the most revolutionary or the highest delta you'll see in the next, in the next 10, after 10 years, right? And then after that, after the 10 years, right, it's kind of a liberating period, right? I think industrial, the growth in the industrial sector kind of slows down, right? The economy kind of starts to slow down as it kind of meets its potential, right? And then you go from high levels of growth to kind of like developed nations, right? And okay, but what's the role for government? And so I have these two things as 5 and 6, but really I think these things go simultaneously, and this is the role for the right here is the role for the private sector, but this is the role of the government, right? And so the government really needs to focus on using the gains from reducing imports and increasing exports, right? So the gains from trade, it needs to use to fund education first and foremost. When the condition for the industrial revolution, when the conditions are present, right? Um, you're gonna need You need an educated workforce who can kind of manage and kind of supply labor and kind of drive that revolution, right? And so, I think immediately, right, starting now, investing in education is key. Uh, Nepal's got a lot of money in its dollar reserves. I think kind of reducing the size of government, right, and just allocating that to schools, kind of actively using, actively drawing into the dollar reserves, and and maybe even taking loans out for to fund education, right? And this is where I think this is a very big thing. This is so important. This is the most important bit about Nepal's growth in after 10 years, right? After 10 years, kind of during the industrial revolution, is having a educated workforce, and in 10 years, right? Some kid is in like first grade right now, or let's say some kid is in like fifth grade right now, right? Um, by the time they graduate college, it's going to be 10 years, right? So that fifth grader needs to be educated to lead the industrial revolution, right? Um, and so that work starts now, and the sooner you start that, the better. Um, I mean, the education in Nepal is not bad, but it can be a lot better. I think you can increase funding in education a lot more, and so that's. But again, you have to, I think, the way, if you really want to like build a nation, you have to assume that in 10 years the industrial revolution will occur and invest in education accordingly, right? That's the only way. You can't be like, well, we're not sure if the industrial revolution is going to happen, right? We're not sure if Nepal is destined for this level of growth, and so perhaps we should just wait and see. That's exactly the wrong approach. Because the downside of investing in education but then it not going your way, right, is that you have a very skilled labor force which can go abroad, and at least you're educating them to be skilled labor for foreign countries. That's better than having a bunch of dumb people, right? Uneducated people, not dumb people. um, and so that kind of starts, and that happens simultaneously with all these four things that I talked about. And then gains from these sources need to fund infrastructure development. Again, that also happens simultaneously. I think we're at a good place in infrastructure development. I think reducing corruption really. I don't think you need to um, increase. I don't think you need to allocate a larger share to capital spending, right? In the budget sheet, right? There's recurrent and capital. I think the level that capital spending is at is fine. It's just that that funding wasn't you isn't hasn't been utilized, and that funding is subject to a lot of corruption. So if you just manage that, I think, and keep funding, roads and hydropower and irrigation projects, and even light rail and heavy rail, right? East-west highway, east-west rail, right? Um, if you start funding these things, and development happens in that sector at a decent pace, it's great for Nepal. Okay, so that's kind of that. Those are kind of the next steps, I think. Um, so I think the path is clear, right? The checkpoints that you have to hit. It's just now the part is first, making sure that we get good governance and the end of corruption, right? And then saying, well, how do we want to hit these checkpoints? How fast do we want to hit how fast do we want to hit them? Um, and where do we focus our policy making, right? It doesn't matter if you subsidize, or if Nepal is, you know um, about has a strong like mango sector or an orange sector, right? And that's the decision. That's the decision. Yeah, how to allocate resources for these industries is kind of the government's role, right? But but regardless of having an orange industry or a mango industry, right? Having an industry in that kind of group, in that product category, is important. And so we know that, right? So there is room for politics here. There is room for policy making flexibility here. But I think these are the checkpoints, right? We're targeting an industrial revolution in 10 years, right? The start of an industrial revolution in 10 years. Okay, and after that, in the next 10, 15 years, it's going to start slowing down. But that's kind of, those are the checkpoints. Those are the next steps in a very broad sense. Um, And then finally, I'm doing some modeling, just some projections. Okay, so current GDP per capita, 1400, current population 30, current GDP, 43 billion. Okay, so I have four scenarios here. These are, just for the sake of the math, for the calculations, I put down these numbers. But really, we want to see these as ranges, right? So if things continue as usual without changing governance quality, you can expect around 4% GDP growth, right? This is in real terms, okay? If there is reduction in corruption but no coordinated policy making or goal-oriented development, okay? So let's say, you know, we get the right people in government after this election, but and the way I see this, like let's say like somebody like Rabi Lamisane, forms a government, right? He's very focused on ending corruption, right? Persecuting corrupt politicians, stuff like that. सुशासन को कायम गराउन होइन भ्रष्टाचारको नियन्त्रण गराउने right but I don't see Robbie Lanshan as like a visionary, right? He doesn't see, I think, or at least from what I've gathered, he doesn't see the future, right? He doesn't have a plan for the future, right? And so somebody like that comes into power and there is no goal oriented development. So like if he doesn't understand that these are the steps that we have to hit and we have to have a industrial revolution in 10 years, um, then it's gonna be better. It's gonna be better than what we see. And so four is just kind of what we're going through right now, right? This is kind of where we're at. Where we've been. It's kind of 4 to 6%, really. I want to say. And then if you have somebody like Rabi Lamisane or somebody who fits his bill or that kind of government, 6 to 8%. I want to say 6 to 9%. In if the private sector can kind of work without the government, 9%, 8%, or if not 6 to 7%, right? Because the private sector can you know kind of grow without the government's you know goal oriented planning, right? Or goal oriented structure, right? It doesn't need that structure. It can kind of build its own structure and kind of adopt its own thing. Um, and what drives them is just having certainty and security and you know a legal system, stuff like that. And so 6 to 8%, I want to say, is that, right? Eight to kind of around 8%. I want to say like 8 to 9% around, right? And so yeah, that's kind of the upper end of that is solid growth for foundation, somewhat coordinated policy making and planning. I think what I just talked about with the private sector, or have you have a solid foundation but policy making is kind of weak. There's some hurdles. There are some exogenous shocks, or corruption still kind of persistent at a very small scale. Things like that. You're looking at 8%. Um, and then the best case scenario, right? Best case scenario, I think everything goes well, right? We have the right leaders, the Lee Kuan Yew, the Deng Xiaopings of Nepal, right? Park Yun Hee, I want to say, who's the guy from Korea? No, it's not Park Yun Hee. Park Chung Hee, right? Park Chung Hee, right? The kind of authoritarian. You know, if you see that kind of leadership structure, um, and you see a very principled, a very fair, a very humble, and by principled I mean like observing these observing these free market principles, these liberal principles, right? These ideologies that say that government should stay out of the free market as much as possible, right? But also saying we're going to build a foundation for good governance. If somebody like that, right, or like a government party, or if Nepali consciousness kind of heightens to that level, right? But conditional to this, like what makes 8 to 10 different is you need to have sea access, right? And Nepal government has to have capability and has to negotiate sea access with India. So rail access directly to Kolkata port or rail access to Bangladesh, right? Ideally both, right? You want, kind of um, a contingency plan, right? So a small corridor that goes to Bangladesh, right, and a corridor and rail access to Kolkata port and Dhaka port, right? Um, that's absolutely key. That's so important. That is, but that's a difficult thing, right? I'm not sure how willing or what the cost will be to to get that concession from India, right? But that's the way I see it. The most difficult part in Nepal's growth story is getting that concession or getting signing that agreement with India, sea access. With sea access, it's over for everybody. I mean, with sea access, Nepal is going to be unstoppable. 10% year over year growth, right? And this is real GDP growth, right? This is high levels of GDP growth. We're talking doubling in every 2 to 3 years, 3 or 4 years, right? And if you kind of play that out in 30 years at 4%, you're looking at 4,700. At 6%, you're looking at 8,600 GDP per capita now, right? At 8%, 15,000, right? At 10%, 28,000. I don't know if in 30 years real GDP per capita GDP will be, you know, GDP per capita will be around like 30,000. I think that's a bit high. I want to say I want to say around like 20-ish, right? So somewhere like 9% is a good estimate, right? So to see 9%, you would need to see 11% year over year growth, and then account for like 2% inflation, right? And yeah, these are kind of yeah, I've kind of tried to deflate this with inflate for inflation just at a 2% rate. This is not the right way to do this, right? But this kind of helps ground it. And then we're looking at like a 2%, 4%, 7%, 13% or 13x growth. I think I kind of fucked up in the modeling here because I think I'm assuming that these are um, real numbers, but then I'm also deflating it. So I wouldn't, but what I would look at is kind of say you can have a around 15x increase in GDP in 30 years, right? And this is not abnormal, right? China's seen this. China from 1995 to 2025 saw a 21x increase in GDP per capita. Okay, Korea from 1980 in 30 years, right? A 13.5x increase in GDP per capita, right? And kind of in that same time period, Nepal from 1995 to 2025, it went from 200 to 1450, right? And I think these are adjusted for inflation, so a 7x increase, right? And so, or no, I'm not sure if these are deflated because the numbers are inconsistent, right? But then you're looking at like a 6.8% growth, right? Um, I want to say this is nominal, but I'm not sure, right? And then so I said that this is deflated against the dollar. I am not sure if this is the case. These might be nominal numbers and not real. So why did I say deflated against the dollar here? I don't know. Anyways, 8%. Okay. And some people talking about monarchy is good, monarchy, I'll be babak saying this stuff. Let's look at the numbers from 2005 to 2025, 20 years, right? 300 to 1450, right? From 1995 to 2005, GDP only went up, like 100 USD per capita, right? In 10 years. But then in 20 years, we went from 300 to 1450 around, right? 8% versus 6% if you account for the 10 years. And so yeah, 1995 to 2005 was not a good time for growth. Obviously, the Maoists are not partially, but they are to blame as well. But kind of the ending of the monarchy led to rapid levels of growth. If we look at 2005 to 2015, it's actually really good. Right before the um, right before the earthquake. Um, so I think yeah. So that's kind of where we're at, and I kind of try to base my thinking, my arguments off of this 10% number, right? I believe we can in 30 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, yeah, like sir, 30,000 USD, right? And why? Well, like, what's the case for that? The case for that is that Nepal has cheap hydropower, very cheap hydropower, right? But the argument against that is it doesn't have sea access, right? Even if you have rail access to Kolkata port, um, that increases marginal costs because of transportation, right? And so an argument against that is that argument for that is for this case is cheap hydropower, um, a small manageable economy. It's not as intractable as India, right? I mean, or China, right? Um, and it's still a very young country. Um, it's got a large diaspora, which I think only helps having a large diaspora. Nepal has one of the largest diasporas, right? Largest percentage of people abroad, right? And so these factors I think help, but it's really just hydropower, right? Hydropower means that you can import everything and then export. But the intermediate process is just using cheap energy to do so, right? There's some case to be made for tourism as well, and I think we definitely should make that case. Um, but yeah, so we're looking at around I think a trillion is a bit ambitious in 30 years. Around 500 plus billion, right? 5 to 8 billion. I think 800 billion is a good place to be in 30 years. But yeah, we don't know what the inflation story is going to be like, right? Um, and and also a lot of this hinges on India's growth, right? If India grows like China for the next 20, 30 years, then Nepal will be 1.5 to 2x richer. Is my estimate, my prediction. But if India's growth slows down, it's going to be a bit difficult for Nepal because it's not going to have access to that large market, right? But yes, sea access is important. That's kind of what I try to emphasize, what I'm trying to emphasize now. But yeah, I think that's been almost an hour. If you watched it and you got something out of it, leave a like, share. Thank you for watching, and people just feel free to reach out to me if, in the comments or whatever if you want to further this discussion. But yeah, for now that's it. Thank you so much for watching.